Desert Oracle Radio.
Some music writers noted the 77th birthday of the great songwriter and troubadour Warren Zevon earlier this week. Zevon actually died 2 decades ago, age 56, another one of my dubious heroes that I've outlived, hooray, both in final age and in linear time, which is the only time we can measure. I don't know about anybody else, but I maintain a background awareness of these things. I guess it started when I was young, noticing how many of my musical and poetic heroes died young. A whole bunch were gone before they turned 30, Hank Williams Sr. especially, aged 29, with his best and most lasting work done in those last years of his 20s, which is sad to realize when you get to 30. Hank Williams, why are we talking about Hank Williams? Because he was immensely gifted and blessed by the poet's muse, the hillbilly Shakespeare, they called him. But we were talking about Warren Zevon. Anybody who knew me in the late 1980s through to the late 1990s knew I usually had a Warren Zevon disc in the 5 CD changer or stacked up on the record player. His 1996 collection, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, has Frank and Jesse James, Desperados Under the Eaves, Rollin', the Headless Thompson Gunner, Hasten Down the Wind, the live version of Muhammad's Radio, Accidentally Like a Martyr, Carmelita. 2.5 hours of beautifully performed and recorded songs pulled off his 10 albums he put out by 1996. But by 2003, he had passed on, which made me realize that 20 years have now passed since a strange time when lots of people were suddenly crazy about weblogs. Blogs. At the height of the weblog hype, which was mostly self-congratulatory, there were parties for bloggers. And Brian Lenz, an independent movie producer and blogger himself, had a party at his house in the Hollywood Hills mid-2002, I believe, and Warren Zevon was there. Brian told me beforehand, my friend Warren says he'll be there, you better come. I did not go to the party. Everybody said Warren Zevon was great, talked to people, cheerful, looking healthy and strong. The cancer took him a year later. I did not go to the party because the blogging stuff was starting to smell to me. Too much hype, too little income, as usual, for me. Plus, everybody was getting very political, earnestly political. And I've just never been able to believe any of that stuff. I started covering local and county politics when I was a teenager. And I'd see how the guy who previously went bankrupt with like a carpet warehouse suddenly had millions of dollars and lived in the big mansion at the top of the hill. And it didn't really matter what party they were in. So I'd rather read E.O. Wilson describing how nearly all human social and political behavior is pretty much the same as life in an ant colony, with just as much thought, none. But what is blogging, anyway? And why was there any hype about it? Weblogs appeared in the last half of the 1990s and were just updates to a website, usually with the latest updates up top. October 13, added new photographs of my computer to the computer photos page, that kind of thing. There was this old hippie whole earth catalog kind of guy, Yorn Barger. And he was adding his thoughts on James Joyce and hypertext theory, and he called it a weblog. By 1999, LiveJournal had begun the teen diary phase. And then there was Blogger, and really simple syndication, RSS, all these systems being personal projects, more or less, And I started using the Blogger software myself in the year 2000 after many years of hand coding my pages. I figured it was the ideal tool for covering stories with an ongoing narrative. So that's how I covered the Republican presidential convention in Philadelphia that summer, and how we covered the Al Gore nomination at the Democrats convention in Los Angeles. Who's the we? You may be wondering. Well, I've got my dear friend and frequent co-conspirator, Matt Welch, on the line from New York City. How you doing, Matt?
I'm just doing fantastic, remembering your piece about Wookiee families.
Oh, yeah. What was that exactly?
So Al Gore, in his big speech, is, accepting the nomination. Instead of doing the John Kerry salute, reporting for duty in 2004, he talked a lot about working families. I'm going to do everything I can about working families. He kept repeating it over and over again. And you wrote a column saying, I just think that it's great that someone's finally sticking up for Wookiee families. And he spent the entire thing taking it absolutely serious, as if he was talking about Wookiee families.
And that's because he was doing that fake Southern accent that he would turn on. Like if he was in a black church. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. He was part of his, one of the Naomis was advising him back then to wear muted colors. Klein Wolf, I think, in the original German. And so he was trying to relate to humans and Tipper Gore. If you'll recall, I know you scrubbed it from your memory, but she had a whole drums for Tipper thing to show that she was cool and like the Grateful Dead.
This is the one who tried to outlaw Prince records.
Yeah, and Jello Biafra and Frank Zappa and whatnot. Yes.
Wookiee families. Now that's owned by Disney, the Wookiee families. It's a damn shame. The Wookiees went woke. So you pretty quickly saw the usefulness of a system that you could just type into with a spot for a headline, and it would post it to the top of your website with a little date and time stamp. No coding required, one-step publishing. And for most of that year, or the second half of that year, I guess, I was an evangelist for the stuff because most of my friends were writers of one kind or another, and it was liberating to just write and publish, which is always tough to do when you're an ambitious writer who wasn't born into money and didn't go to an Ivy League school or any school at all in my case. So I set up custom blogs and websites for many occasions, many people. The mattwelch.com website, that was an early one.
I think we used HomeSite for that as the publishing software originally.
Yes, which was a great. Well, that was to build the pages,
right?
And then we integrated Blogger code into it, but they all had a separate design. So yours, I made turquoise and off-white, and you had a little black and white picture of you in a
straw hat,
a Cuban hat, right?
Yeah, the day after my wedding, I was totally hungover. My wife, it's been forgotten by history a little bit too much, but she started basically the first French blog at the time. She was correspondent for Libération.
That's right.
And was covering Silicon Valley as well as Hollywood. And I once went to a conference with her, I think in the early aughts or something in France, and she was hailed as the French god blogger or godmother of blogs or something.
Yeah. Pretty funny. To this day, she's known as the French Andrew Sullivan. No, that's not true. I'm sorry, Emmanuel. Dave Barry, that's another one I made.
You made his? Okay, wow.
His first one, and then they integrated that into the Miami Herald site, and that became his job because he was sick of doing a column.
We would meet Dave Barry, who's an American hero, at the political conventions. He'd always go and he'd write a daily column for the this sort of made just for the convention daily paper thing that was actually pretty good, but mostly because it had his column in it and the schedule of the day's events. And he would basically seek us out. And I gotta just, shout out to anyone who was seeking you and me out in 2000 and 2004. We were a rare taste, let's say, but he was very, very sweet with us. And I remember he get me on the phone in 2004 in maybe it was the Boston Democratic
Boston,
National
that's right. That was,
Convention.
I did not go to that.
And back then, in 2004, like, okay, this is the first convention to be blogged, right? This is, even though it wasn't, because you did the first blog, I think, of any convention in 2000.
We both worked on the 2000 one for online journalism review at a USC.
Correct. And specifically your work in the Republican one in Philadelphia, I think was the first of that. And maybe Mickey Kaus was also doing it. But Dave Barry gets me on the phone. It's like, so what's it feel like to be a blogger, over and over again? And in fact, now that I'm remembering it, I interviewed him at the 2004 convention. And while I was interviewing him, we were like in those crappy little journalist bar things that you have. And I opened up a can of Budweiser and stuck my finger down in the hole.
You cut your finger.
And just cut it. It was just gushing blood. And I was recording it. And he started doing a play-by-play of me sucking the blood out of my finger. It really made for a top quality interview.
Yes, which I think went into the Reason Magazine hit and run blog.
Yes.
There's dredging up a lot of unfortunate memories. Our journalist buddy Tim Blair in Australia, too, he secretly contributed to this online newspaper I started in 1997, tabloid.net, which you also edited and wrote for, A Tale for Another Day. But we made his blog.
Mm-hmm.
And then you and I also set up what later became known as a multi-author blog. Mm-hmm. And I looked this up on the internet this week, and it says that was invented in 2012 or something.
Oh,
no.
Multi-author blogs were invented in 2012?
Yeah, everything on the internet is wrong now. LA Examiner, LAexaminer.com, that was the first city news blog that I'm aware of, years before Gothamist and Gawker and LAist, years, We started that at the beginning of April 2000 or beginning of 2001?
April 2001 is when we pulled the trigger on it to begin with. And it was me and you and 3 or 4 of our friends we've known for a long time and done jackassy media things with. And what was great is that we made it totally anonymous. And in terms of like there weren't any bylines, we linked to absolutely everybody doing media in Los Angeles, partly just so we can keep track of it. But also we wanted to see who would ego surf themselves first.
Yeah. And it turns out everybody.
Yeah, well, Kathy Sipe, even quicker than everybody, unsurprisingly. But it was fun. The other one that was kind of similar, and it came out right around the same time, was here in New York. There was the Smarter Times that Ira Stoll and a couple other guys started. And it was just sort of bitching about the New York Times.
Oh, yeah. That was the media criticism one.
Yes. Ours was, we did media criticism. We basically poked fun at the LA Times on a pretty regular basis. But also we're just, hey, look, there's a great piece in this local thing that you would have no idea about. But here it is. Here's Gustavo Arellano doing something funny and good. Or like Shaq and Kobe did something funny today. We would sort of write about those things together. It was less media centric. But this all came sort of weirdly interesting in 2002. And we let it kind of go up and down, and maybe I'm jumping the line a little bit, but September 11th kind of threw
that's
everything.
where we're going, yeah. It was under the radar in those first 6-10 months or whatever. You and I were both freelancing mostly for the Online Journalism Review at USC. This was a web publication that they started. They were pretty forward thinking about such things. They started it, I believe, in 1998. And it was about online journalism. Lots of hand wringing, very common then and now. They were troubled by the Drudge Report, troubled by the implications, concerned about fact checking.
I think me and you were interjecting a lot of like, hey, look, a lot of people are having fun and doing interesting things here.
Yeah, and that's why Bob Scheer mostly insisted that we stayed around.
Yeah.
God bless him, because the rest of them wanted us dead.
Yeah.
They were uneasy about people who hadn't been properly vetted by a graduate degree in covering city council meetings and a for-profit media corporation. They were troubled by people just writing words and posting them, as writers and poets have done for millennia. But they had money and we had to pay rent. I think they paid us about $800 a column.
Yeah. I mean, that's after
good money.
That was great. I was also working at the time for Bob Scheer's son, Chris Scheer, at the website of a telephone company. The website was called workingforchange.com. We used to
I remember that.
You used to call Working for Spare Change.
Yes.
I wrote a column called the $50 Outrage, because that's how much they paid me every column.
That was a good column. I remember that well.
And I covered the Nader campaign in 2000 for them as well.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And then you started freelancing for Reason magazine, which you're still working for in different capacity, but still editorial. They were in Santa Monica at the time. You started meeting those people. But, we survived barely. Nobody much noticed us as usual. And then came, as you say, 911, and all of a sudden everybody could not get enough of the news. Everybody. What was happening? Why? What next? And during those weeks and months afterwards, the regular corporate media seemed unwilling and unable to provide what people wanted, outrage, answers, historical and geopolitical context, anger, that was real, some humor too, which was illegal after 911 well, I guess it never came back. Nobody's ever really been funny. They're just funny now because somebody else says they're not funny.
Right.
That's the entirety of comedy, which is a lot of fun. We had a baffled new president, George W. Bush, who told Americans to go shopping. I don't like shopping. And I don't have any money for shopping, even if I liked it. I'd spent my adult life to that point getting on a cheap flight to wherever it was happening in the world, wherever I might make a living typing up some articles and drinking away the evenings with people of similar habits. But now, as Malcolm X has said about America in the 60s, the chickens had come home to roost. And we were there in the roost. And 911 began this torrent of words. Media people with a name brand at the time, like Andrew Sullivan, who we've already mentioned, quickly took to blogging. Lots of people without lucrative personal brands did the same. Many of those people were in and around Los Angeles. We had all these new tools all of a sudden. We'd be very excited when these things would appear. Like, remember the page view counters that you could just put on your page? Oh, we watched those like a hawk. And the commenting systems, we added those into the blogs in these informal networks called blog rolls, originally hand-coded, just like on LA Examiner, just links to everything, like Drudge had done since 97, 96. And our old buddy Henry Copeland, who we'd worked for in Budapest at the Business Journal, and who wrote about the infamous, he wrote the infamous Details magazine article about an earlier collection of adventurous and sometimes degenerate young writers gathered in Prague of 1991. He started this small advertising business that catered to the sudden explosion in blogs. Blog ads, specifically because the new big advertising company, Google, and Henry always said, Google's not a search company, it's an advertising company. He said that 20 years before it was conventional wisdom. He started this little thing called blog ads, which ended up becoming the only way you can make money from doing these blogs. And I have a romantic nature, My personal ideal was always a late night freelancer with that machine gun IBM Selectric, the radio on, coffee and whiskey at hand. And the blogging life was exactly that for me for a while.
Yeah.
Because of all the LA bloggers and the occasional need to get weird with your comrades, suddenly there were blogger parties. Initially, because you and I, and really mostly Emmanuel, and maybe Ben Sullivan, started crashing the LA Press Club bar nights in Silver Lake.
Those became sooner rather than later kind of blogger parties. Where the outsiders were kind of let in. And it was hilarious to see like an entire, and this is a lot of work of Emmanuel, Kathy Sipe, who died like 15 years ago now, and Amy Alcon, but they were already organizing sort of monthly parties when someone had a new book out or something like that. LA is a freelancer town. It always has been, always will be. So you had the freelancers that were already existing, and then sort of us, rabble blogger type of people. And we were already by, I think, 2002 saying we hope to never hear that word again. And like the last place we'd want to see it is on our gravestone. But we would go, and we were all having fun. We were all broke. I mean, brokey McBroke pants broke. And we were having a great time. And then meanwhile, the legacy institutional media, especially the LA Times, but others as well, just were grumping about everything, especially about the growth of new people being able to start their own blogs. It was kind of a hilarious juxtaposition that was going on. So there's a lot of life. It was really fun. And almost immediately, everyone started huffing their own farts, which is less fun, honestly. I mean, it can be fun for the first half second, but you could feel that coming on, including people who, had never before been in journalism world or never been kind of like notorious, semi-famous for what their writing is. They would go on, start typing on their blogs and become hugely popular. And they would get captured by their audience and turn into kind of monsters. Saw this happen more than once, and it can be weird and bad. And this was all kind of happening at the same time, but it was fun too. I mean, there was a time when I remember, and I don't know why I would know this because I wouldn't be obsessively Googling my own first name, but at some point I was like the number 6 Matt on the Google search, which is ridiculous. I'm not the number 6 Matt of this house, probably, let alone the world, because these blogs were way over indexed. And there was just this, people were starting these things right and left, and they were pointing to you. Ken said that we're blogs. This is 2001 or something. We're going to fact check your ass. That was a quote that people love to talk about. And they were there's this mutual inspiration society that came up. And, I think you have even a more sensitive instinct than I do of like, just as soon as that's like heating up and peaking, you kind of want to crawl back over there and get away from all of it, because you could see that this might go to a bad place. And sadly, I think it did. Although it was a great jolt of fun, of meeting new people, of writing, of having new audiences, some of which have stuck. I mean, I do a podcast now, and a couple of them, but one called The Fifth Column. And I saw people like in the comments talking about, when did you first get to it? And someone's like, I started following Matt and Ken Lane back in the old blogging days and just keep following. It's like, that's crazy to me. That's what a wonderful thing to have people follow you through the really weird ups and downs since then.
Well, it became, I think, during that very brief golden age of something like what the underground press was, what underground FM radio had been before that, pirate radio. And to me, that's always where the fun is.
Yep.
That brief moment. And it's always brief. That's why I've had 200 jobs, because you gotta go. I think right around the time of this famous blogging party, although I might be off by, like we talked about before we went on the air, I've never written about the blogging stuff. I've written about some certain things we've done, LA Examiner in particular, because that turned into almost a new newspaper in Los Angeles that we were going to run. That was fun. But the blogging thing itself, by the time of the Warren Zevon party, I was just about to quit. And not long after that, I deleted my entire blog and replaced it with a picture of a Willie Nelson bumper sticker from the back of somebody's car. I saw somewhere. It said, "Don't blame me. I voted for Willie Nelson." Which is evergreen. You can always put that on your car. It's always correct.
Yes. And you always did just vote for Willie Nelson. Local city council, Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson. Yeah. School board, Moms for Christ, whatever.
Yeah. You were also moving to Reno at around that time too, I think.
That's right. Early 2003.
And it was, the LA Examiner process, which was hilarious and great. And neither of us, I can state confidently, regret a second of it. It was just really fun. But it left both of us semi-internet famous and broke, which is a really strange and poignant condition to be in for two not as young as they used to be, freshly married gentlemen in the profession of writing. So it was a little bit challenging coming out of it, and also like you wanted to be able to do other things besides just late night typing. You wanted to do other types of reporting or existing or tracking stuff down. Like you were right in sharks got to keep swimming and swimming forward. And you could see already, I think I wrote a piece in 2004 for a reason called a farewell to war blogging, which is sadly a word that I've now been officially declared by Wikipedia of having coined.
Oh my God. Sorry.
I called my blog the War Blog, and that was on the little HTML. And should hasten to point out, it wasn't like because I want to go to war. The first post that I had there was some September 14th, 2001.
Yeah.
And the title of it was Welcome to War. And it wasn't like because we're going to war. It's because that was just an act of war that happened to us. And like the sooner you think about it that way, the more you're going to sort of like face harsh reality. It was wrong about plenty of that stuff, but a lot of people got very excited about the word. And there was a brief moment in which it felt like the way that this new crop of people were approaching news and commentary felt like it could be a little bit post-partisan. It could be injecting more humor, which is you and I have been looking for forever in old media. There seemed to be possibilities of just kind of like shaking up the snow globe in a way that was going to be interesting. You could already tell by 2004 that many of those early adherents, most of the most famous ones, were just going back into new ruts.
Yes.
Using or the old ruts using the new systems, and that was much less interesting.
It was talk radio. It was, do you like the Patriot channel or the Communist channel?
Yeah.
And won't we turn on the nice classical music channel and not hear any of that?
Yeah.
So I was out by 2004. I quit writing for about 2 years during that time. I wrote. You always write. We made some rock and roll records.
That's right.
I cleared my head, had some children. And then since I was still broke, the more ambitious people with financial resources, like our friend Nick Denton, when the time came, I had to go crawling to Nick Denton and say, hey, you got a job for me at this blog company that you've based on our work? Which he was always very open about doing.
He would keep reformulating his version in his brain of what tabloid was, tabloid.net. Which
and he made that work and employed hundreds of people over the years, and until what happens, they start thinking that they're the kings of the revolution, and that's right about when they're going to be dragged out to the guillotine. So I hung around there in different capacities until 2014, when I said, I got to get out. This whole thing is a house of cards. It's coming down. And I got out about a year ahead of the shutdown of Gawker, and then the collapse of digital media and the rest of written word journalism and everything it's just gotten worse ever since.
I mean, we're talking in a pretty amazing week for the collapse of all kinds of journalistic institutions.
Yeah.
Now, like real death row stuff. I don't anticipate the LA Times surviving the calendar year. And
the name will, the brand will.
Yeah, it'll be some like vulture capitalist,
It'll be like LA Weekly is now.
Yeah, I saw in the Village Voice, which apparently still has some kind of zombie ownership. They're writing like weird Epoch Times content, propping up conservative politicians, like to beat back rape charge. Like none of it makes sense. And it's the Village Voice, right? The place that started alt weekly alternative journalism in the 50s. It's awful. And also having worked at the LA Times and trying to change things from within, a place that sold for $1.5 billion in 2000 and was the most profitable newspaper probably in the history of America between 1965 and 1990, never could adapt to the new reality. It's a success curse. When you're making that much money, you're that powerful, the people who work for you, including yourselves, are not going to solve the industry once the industry turns and changes. It's awful to see, but one of the good things about being a weird person who tries to create new stuff along the margins is that one out of every so many of them kind of stick, and you don't have to lash your own self to an old dying beast. No. And you can always create new stuff.
This is something that, of course, I feel bad for all the people who've lost jobs over this week, last year, the last 3 years. But that was also the reality when I came to Prague and met you 33 years ago. All the PM papers were closing, afternoon papers by the hundreds. There were no journalism jobs. It was all over. It was all over then. It's always all over.
1990 was the year that it stopped. And it just the trend line has been going straight down ever since. The people who we staffed the paper with in Prague were people like you and other people who had so much more impressive clips than we did. And we were just out of college kids, but for the same reason. And the old structures, the way that those newspapers had now worked, because they gotten so fat, was that you had to pass all the guild rules in order to get the job at the local podunk weekly. And they didn't adapt to being able to recognize weirder and more interesting talent. They're like, nope, got to follow the rules. And so those types of people would come out and with a wilder look in their eye. And we got some incredible talent out there. People we had no connection with, but who couldn't get a job in newspapers in America.
Right. Or people like me who gave up their good job and health insurance and retirement fund and everything else. What was I, 24 or something? I don't need that.
Yeah.
We can do that later. We'll do that another time.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's one more thing I wanted to mention.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was the first time I realized that our enjoyable little scene in Los Angeles was bigger than we knew. It's when Nick Denton, who was guest lecturing as a journalism professor at UC Berkeley.
Right.
And it must have been 6 or 8 months after September 11th, mid-2002, invited us to come up and speak to his graduate journalist class. And we asked him, can we mention this on our blogs? And he said, oh, yeah, of course. I don't know how many of my students even know what a blog is. So we did. And 100 people, rabble, filled this classroom along with the, 20 graduate journalism students, because they knew us from these blogs that we were doing from our low rent apartments. That was a shock to me. I just didn't realize there were that many people who would turn up in person, in the flesh.
I remember that now that you mentioned it, because I'd forgotten. But also when we were talking about starting at the LA Examiner, hundreds of resumes of people from all over the country. And this is even before it started getting press attention. Both those things were like, wait, what? And then also people, the early readers of those early blogs had just an amazing connection with all of us personally in a way that's only been replicated in my experience on podcasts, because it hits you different in the ears. And like people would mail us cookies.
People used to send me vodka. It was fantastic. Oof. All right, it's going to cut us off. Let me thank Matt Welch from We the Fifth podcast and also Reason Magazine. And I'll link to his things. The podcast is good. He's got 3 or 4 weirdos on there and sometimes a funny guest.
Yep.
There's much more to say about this, but I think we maybe said exactly the right amount.
Exactly. Love it all. It's fun to talk about and think about.
Desert Oracle Radio.